Hi, I'm excited to be introducing our new series on the theme of unity in diversity. Paul writes in Romans 8 verse 22, "We know that all of creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth until now." Well, I think that groaning has been loud and clear this year particularly. We've heard it in the fear and suffering of those impacted by COVID-19. We've heard it from the black and minority ethnic communities weary of injustice. We've heard it in the Me Too outcry of women tired of harassment and inequality. We've heard it in the Extinction Rebellion climate protests longing for change. We've heard it in the fear of asylum seekers risking their lives in small boats. And if we've listened carefully, we've heard it in the misery of families driven into poverty and dependence on handouts and food banks. Paul goes on to explain that creation has been groaning in the pains of childbirth in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. These are labor pains as creation is bringing something new to birth, a new humanity and a new creation. And I'll explain a little bit more about what that means in a moment. 57 years ago, Martin Luther King stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, addressing a crowd of 250,000 civil rights protesters. He was coming to the end of his speech calling for an end to racism in the United States, when the American gospel singer Mahalia Jackson called out to him, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." And that's what he went on to do. And I suppose the rest is history. He went on to complete his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, which is reckoned to be perhaps the greatest speech of the 20th century in America. In that speech, he said, "I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today." And he continued that, saying, "With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood." I love that expression, a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. Well, I guess it's still a dream. It's not become a reality yet. But that dream was an echo of a dream that's been in the Father's heart since the beginning of time. It's a dream when every people, all people, regardless of their backgrounds, will live in love and unity together. And it's not just a dream, it's a coming reality. John the Apostle, in his Revelation, describes seeing before him a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. That's in Revelation chapter 7, verse 9. He saw a beautiful, multicolored, multi-ethnic family of lovers of God. That's where creation is taking us. Well, that's amazing, you might say, but I'm not sure that's what we see. And actually, one of Martin Luther King's most enduring statements is that 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning is the most segregated hour of the week. And sadly, even today, regardless of which side of the Atlantic you look, you're more likely to find single culture, monocultural churches than multicultural and diverse ones. Those Sunday morning gatherings are still quite segregated. Well, I know for myself, I actually rather like being with people who are a bit like me. People where I feel like I belong, who perhaps like the same music, the same style of worship, the same style of preaching, the same food, the same films, the same sense of humour. It's a lot easier. It's a lot more comfortable. But is that what God is really wanting for his people? You see, the New Testament describes something much more radical. When Jesus launched his disciples into the world, they were going into the Roman Empire, a society much more divided even than we are today. There were the Roman citizens at the top and many layers down, the slaves at the bottom. It was a society certainly divided between men and women, but also divided on religious and cultural lines as well. And yet this new family of disciples that Jesus launched was made up of men and women, young and old, rich and poor, a community that was to welcome and include every ethnic background. Of course, it wasn't easy, and we read how even a few years in, Peter had to receive angelic visitations and visions from heaven before he was willing to go to the house of a non-Jew, Cornelius the centurion. And the New Testament letters are largely made up of writers trying to encourage and help the early church deal with issues of division and difference. Paul's letter to the Galatians is a classic example. He describes how Peter came to Antioch, and while he was there initially, he was happy to go and eat with the non-Jews and to have fellowship with them. But when some conservative types came up from the church in Jerusalem, he withdrew and refused to have fellowship with the non-Jews. Well, Paul called him on it and publicly explained the hypocrisy of that. And he went on to say in no uncertain terms what a massive deal this was. He writes in Galatians 1 verse 6, "I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you to live in the grace of Christ and are turning to a different gospel." Basically, the way we live together as the people of God embodies the gospel. And Paul could see that these divisions were actually denying the gospel. They were like a different gospel. And so he goes on in Galatians 3 verse 28 to write, "There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise." In that one statement, Paul undoes the fundamental divisions in human society. Have a look at it. Jew nor Gentile. Now, obviously, there's important theological things going on in that distinction, but we can certainly include within that cultural divisions that we might experience between people from different races or national heritage. Neither slave nor free. That speaks of people's social status and those kind of divisions that we see in society. And of course, male and female, where there are still tensions and inequalities today. And Paul goes on to say that this is a calling for all of us because we are part of Abraham's seed. In other words, we are inheriting the promise that God gave to Abraham thousands of years ago, that he would be the father of many nations and that they would all be blessed through him. All included. For those who are born again, those who belong to Christ, our identity is as sons and daughters of Abraham, children of God. And we're all members of that one blessed family through our faith in Jesus, regardless of our background and heritage, our race or our gender. Now, the early Christians knew this was really challenging, but they also knew it was really important. And that's why we're going to be looking at these three different distinctions a little bit more closely over the coming weeks. We're going to be looking at social background, at race, and at gender, and looking at how, with God's help, we can be a place of unity and healing. Okay, so it's important, but why is it so important? Well, first of all, it's because being a united and diverse people reveals God's heart of love. Because he's a loving father, he doesn't want anyone to be excluded from his family because of their background, but rather his heart is to include people. And we see Jesus modeling that. He got in trouble so many times for having fellowship, eating together with people who were excluded and marginalized. It was sacrificial and costly for him to do that, but he made a priority of it. It's important as well because it's a matter of justice. God is a God of justice, and it reveals his justice when we include those of different backgrounds to ourselves, those who might otherwise be excluded. It reveals God's character, but it also reveals that Jesus is Lord. You see, where else in the world could people of such diversity come together as one loving family? It's a miracle, it's a sign and a wonder when God causes us to dwell together in unity. And it's also, I believe, really attractive to people around us, people who are weary of injustice and division, who are looking for something better. And they'll be drawn to Jesus as we love one another. But the third reason why it's important is because I believe it reveals heaven's beauty. I've had the privilege over a number of occasions to be in a Christian fellowship with people from all around the world, of all sorts of backgrounds. And I have loved it. I've loved the breadth of styles of worship, of different spiritualities, the different insights that people bring as we read God's word together. And our family have been blessed by forming some deep friendships with some really special people from other backgrounds. I think of Leslie, our friend, who's Hong Kong Chinese from Canada. I think of Billy, who's a Kurdish Iranian who really became part of our family. I think of Virginie, who was a Congolese human rights protester who we came to know and love well. I think of G, a Chinese Malaysian. These people we've wept with, we've laughed with, and we have been so blessed by as we've reached out and formed wonderful friendships with. Finding unity in diversity as the people of God reveals God's heart of love, it reveals Jesus as Lord, and it reveals heaven's beauty. And this is part of what creation is groaning and longing for. But it won't just happen. The church has been around for 2,000 years and we're still struggling with this. It's going to require real determination and intention. It's going to require sacrifice. Love always does. It certainly requires humility. And it's going to require prayer. I believe there's a spiritual battle over this issue. I spoke before about the importance of feeling a sense of belonging in church. Let me just paint a picture for you. Imagine that you've been invited to a wedding and you're going into the reception. As is so often the case, there's a board up with different tables and a seating plan. And you go to find your table. You go with slight trepidation. Who have I been seated with? I don't know these people. Will I get on? Will I feel I belong at that table? But as you arrive, you find a place with your name on it, because you have been invited, and you look around the table, knowing that each person at this table is important to the bride and groom. Each has been individually invited, and they've been put together with you in the hope that you're going to make the effort to get on and have a great celebration in honour of the bride and groom. Now, they may not be the kind of people you'd choose to sit with, but for the sake of the bride and groom, and because they're precious to him and her, you make that effort. I believe God is looking for us to have the same heart. It's not about whether I'm with people who are just like me, but God has chosen me. He's called me his son. He's invited me to the table. And he's also invited a whole lot of other people, quite different from me, each of them precious to him. And he's calling me to make the effort to get along, to accept, to love and welcome them. And as we do that, he is honoured and his heart is delighted. We're all invited to the table, and by God's grace, we are going to reflect his goodness as we celebrate unity in our diversity.